factor label method. Now, the factor label method, this is probably the most important thing that you guys will learn in this class. And so the factor label method is our way of, in chemistry, to perform pretty much all of our calculations except for ones that have equations. Like density has an equation. And so we use the factor label method a ton in chemistry to solve for different things. And so we're going to start off with just some conversions between units. And so some conversion factors that we can use, and you will have to actually memorize these four in addition to the metric system when you're actually in school. And so our first one here is 1 mile. And 1 mile is equal to 5,280 feet. And so if you've ever watched Remember the Titans, there's a scene in there where the coach, yells, how many feet are in a mile? 5,280. And so if you are a big fan of Remember the Titans, go back and watch that scene at some point. Otherwise, our next one, we got 1 gallon is equal to 3.78 liters. Then pounds to grams, it says 1 pound is 454 grams. And then finally, the last one, which we're going to use a ton, 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters. Now, in addition to these four conversion factors, there are tons and tons of other conversion factors out there. For example, if your car gets 30 miles per gallon, that means that the conversion factor that you can actually use or write is 30 miles for every 1 gallon. Or miles per hour is miles per 1 hour. And so in addition to these conversion factors that we've written here, let's just kind of take a second and let's actually talk about all of the ones that you guys saw earlier today with the metric system. Now, in the metric system, we had tons and tons of units, but the ones that you guys need to kind of know and remember are giga, and I'm just going to use the letter abbreviations, but we have giga. Okay. Then after that, we're going to put 2 dots, and then it goes to mega, and then 2 more dots, and then it's to kilo. Now remember, the reason we have those dots is because from giga to mega, it doesn't jump by a power of 10, it jumps by a power of 10 to the third. So as we're counting, we can include those dots to count. Then after kilo, remember the King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk, so we have King Henry is hecto. Then after that, we have deca. Then our base units, then deci, centi, milli. Now after milli, there were 2 other units that you guys needed to remember, and those happen to be micro and nano. Now, just like with giga and mega, the micro and nano jumps by 3. So first up is micro, and then afterwards we have nano. And so let's kind of go through and use our information here to solve our first question. And so our first one is convert 45 kilometers to inches. Now with this, we are actually going to set this up the exact same way we were setting up our metric conversions earlier. So it starts off with 45 kilometers. Now, if we're trying to go from kilometers to inches, we don't have a conversion factor that does that, right? But we do have a conversion factor that gives us inches to centimeters. So what that means in terms of our problem solving is we're going to convert kilometers to centimeters, and then we're going to convert from centimeters to inches. And that's going to be our way of solving this problem. So our first step should be to convert our 45 kilometers to centimeters. Now, as we do that, remember what you want over what you got. So centimeters goes on top, kilometers goes on the bottom. Now, remember when we talked about our metric conversions, We said the higher unit gets the 1, the lower unit gets the 10. Now I had to write it left to right, but the same idea is true. Further left gets the 1, further to the right gets the 10. Now in this case, our K is further to the left, so that's going to get the 1. And our centimeters is further to the right, so that gets the power of 10. And now let's count how many spots over we're going. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that means, remember, it's 10 to the 5th power. So now, in terms of factor labeling, we canceled kilometers out, and now we have centimeters. But remember, we don't want centimeters, we want inches. So if we put inches on top and centimeters on the bottom, now we go over to that last conversion factor, and it says 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters. So the way that we plug that in is exactly as it appears. We put 1 with inches and 2.54 with our centimeters. And now we go through and plug this in, and keep in mind kilometers are big. That's what, aside from America, that's what everybody else uses as their long distance measurement, similar to what we do for miles. So that's probably quite a few inches. Now, when you plug this into your calculator, let's take a second to talk about how to do that. And so when you plug this in, you're going to multiply, or you're going to start off with 45, and then you're going to do times 10 to the 5th power. Now, when I do it, I like to hit enter here. And then you know how if you start typing, your calculator naturally takes the answer that you just had? That's what I like to do. But if you wanted to do it all as one, it would be 45 times 10 to the 5th power. Then you'd hit divided by 2.54 and then enter. Now, if you wanted to do it as 2 separate steps, basically you do your 45 times 10 to the 5th power, hit enter, and then do divided by 2.54. You do not need to plug in as it appears as fractions. You can if you'd like. It's just a lot of extra calculator number crunching. And so I'm a big believer in the fact that calculator errors are one of the biggest nuisances. And so, in my opinion, the fewer numbers that you can plug in on the calculator, the better off you're going to be. And so, with that in mind, let's kind of go through now and plug this into our calculator. And so, as you guys are plugging this into your calculator, we should get the same answer, and it should be 1771653.5. And yes, I know that there's some other numbers there, but let's not write all of this every single time. Let's just round for now. And for today, we're just going to say we're going to round to 3 sig figs for all of our questions. And so if we're rounding to 3 sig figs, that means that we're going to keep the 1, the 7, and the 7. And then we look, the rest of these are going to end up being zeros. So we're going to call this 177, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. And this is inches. So as we're looking at this, that means that 45 kilometers is 1,770,000 inches. All right, that's it for our first one. Let's look at another example here. So this time we have how many gallons is 14.78 liters. So we start off with our 14.78 liters. And now, if we're trying to convert to gallons, gallons should go on top, liters should go on the bottom. And now let's look at our conversion factor. So our conversion factor for gallons to liters is this second one here. And it says that 1 gallon is 3.78 liters. So that means, just like we did with our last one, it should be 1 gallon over 3.78 liters. And so now this cancels out, giving us gallons, which is what we're trying to solve for. So we're done. We can just plug this into our calculator. And so now when we plug this into our calculator, it would be 14.78 divided by 3.87, which should give us 3.91 gallons. All right, so that's it for this example. Let's look at our next one. The fastest I ever went on the Autobahn was 212 kilometers per hour. And our question is, let's convert this to miles per hour. Now, one of the big things here is that as we're writing this, notice our 212 is written as kilometers per hour. And so that means as we're starting to write our first number here, it's going to be 212 kilometers over 1 hour. Now, yes, I know this can be a little bit confusing because I didn't drive 212 kilometers per hour for an entire hour, but that's how we can write those complex numbers being ones that have 2 units. So it has kilometers and it has hours. Just like at the end, MPH, miles per hour, is going to end up being miles per hour. So same idea is true. Now, if this is the case, if we have kilometers per hour and we're trying to get to miles per hour, the important thing here is we need to convert kilometers to miles. Now, since we don't have a conversion factor that goes straight from kilometers to miles, instead, what we do have is a conversion factor to go from inches to centimeters. And this is important because this is what I call like a system switch. We're switching from the metric system to the American system or the imperial system. And so since we're making this switch, that does mean that we instead need to go through and use that conversion factor. So if we have to use the conversion factor of inches to centimeters, that does mean that we need to convert kilometers to centimeters first. And so as we convert kilometers to centimeters, we should have centimeters on top, kilometers on the bottom, and then we can look at what we wrote down before with our metric system, and we actually counted this out already. So kilo is further to the left, so it gets a 1, centi further to the right, so it gets the 10, and then it's 5 spots, which means that as we plug this in, since kilo is bigger, it gets the 1, centi gets the 10, and it's 5 spots, so it's 10 to the 5th power. So now this allowed us to convert from kilometers to centimeters since the kilometers canceled. And now we need to convert centimeters to inches. And so if we need centimeters to cancel out, that means since it's on the top here, it needs to go on the bottom here. And then inches should be on top. And so if we looked at that last conversion factor, there's 1 inch for every 2.54 centimeters. Now, centimeters is canceled out, and we're in inches. Now we need to convert inches all the way back up to feet. Now, hopefully, we all know that there are 12 inches in every 1 foot. And so now inches cancels, and then we need to go from feet to miles. And remember, there are 5,280 feet for every 1 mile. And so now feet should cancel out, leaving us with just miles on top. And then for our bottom unit, remember, we're looking for miles per hour. So we have miles on top here at the end. And then our 1 hour that we had at the beginning, since we didn't cancel it out, it transfers all the way over to the end. And so now let's talk about how you plug this into your calculator. And so just like with our other example, or our first example where we had 2 steps, for this one, and I know I'm going to write a little bit down here, just we'll erase it, but it would be 212 times 10 to the 5th power. Then it's divided by 2.54. Then our next conversion factor, we divide it by 12. Then last up, we divide again by 5,280. And so this should be what it looks like in your calculator, and then you hit enter. And so now, as you hit enter, you should see that it becomes 132 miles per hour. Now, I know it didn't come out exactly to 132, but remember at the beginning we said we were just going to stick to 3 sig figs for all of our calculations in the video. So there it is. We rounded to 3 sig figs, And that means that I was driving 132 miles per hour. Well, I wasn't driving, but I was in the car for 132 miles per hour. All right, now let's look at our next example. And this one's a little bit different. So it says the speed limit on the Autobahn is 2 kilometers per minute, and we need to convert this to miles per hour. So it's very similar to our last example, except we didn't have to convert time last time. But here we have minutes, and it's asking for miles per hour. So we also need to take that last step and convert minutes to hours. And so now let's kind of start off like we did with our last one. And we need to convert 2 kilometers per 1 minute. And as we try and convert it to miles per hour, just like our last example, since we have to convert kilometers to miles and minutes to hours, let's just start with converting kilometers to miles, which means that it's all of the exact same steps that we just had. So we have centimeters first, and there's 1 kilometer for every 10 to the 5th centimeters. Then we convert centimeters to inches, and for every 1 inch, there are 2.54 centimeters. Then centimeters cancels, leaving us with inches. Then we go through, and if we're trying to get all the way back to miles, we need to convert inches first to feet. And we know that there are 12 inches for every 1 foot. And then we need to take the step of converting feet to miles. And so if we do that, we have miles on top, feet on the bottom, and we know that there are 5,280 feet for every 1 mile. So now when we double check, we have miles left at the end that didn't cancel. So that's good. We're part of the way there. So now when we convert minutes to hours, what's different here is the fact that as we're converting, we know that there are 60 minutes in an hour. Now let's go back and look. Now at the very beginning, minutes was on the bottom, which means that in order for us to cancel it out, minutes needs to go on the top here and hours needs to go on the bottom. And so like we said, we know that there are 60 minutes for every 1 hour. And so now minutes at the end is going to cancel with the minutes that we started with in the beginning. And so now the only 2 units that didn't cancel out are miles and hours, which is good. We want miles per hour, right? Which means miles would be on top, hours would be on the bottom. And so now when we plug this into our calculator, we end up getting 74.6 miles per 1 hour. All right, so that's it for that one. I know, a little bit trickier. And finally, our last one here. So our question is 1 calorie is equal to 4.184 joules. How many joules of energy are stored in a Snickers bar that contains 185 kilocalories? Which is actually what you're reading when you're looking at the food nutrition information, is it's showing you the calories, but as kilocalories, not just regular calories. Now, one important thing here, and questions oftentimes do this, they give us conversion factors to use. And so it says 1 calorie is equal to 4.184 joules. Now, just like at the top of this page, we have these conversion factors to use. And so that means as we read this, we can set this up as 1 calorie over 4.184 joules, or we could also write it as 4.184 joules over every 1 calorie. And so that's the thing with these conversion factors, is we can flip them and use one over the other depending on what units we need to cancel out. All right, so now as we're getting started, we should be with our 185 kilocalories. And then Here we go. 185 kilocalories. And we need to first convert kilocalories to regular calories. So just like with the metric system, kilo represents 1,000 times the base unit. And so our base unit in this case would be calories. And so we have regular calories on top, kilocalories on the bottom. And for this, a regular calorie would be 10 to the third, and that would be equal to 1 kilocalorie. So now that we have this, that gets us from the kilocalories to just regular calories. And we need to know how many joules of energy are stored. So now if we want joules and we need to cancel out calories, looking at our first conversion factors here, we have conversion factor A and conversion factor B. Now, which one do you think we need to use? Hopefully, if you are trying to cancel out calories and get joules, you picked option B. And so if that's the case, then it would be 4.184 joules for every 1 calorie. And now that cancels out our calories. And so if we plug this in, we would have 185 times 10 to the third, and then times 4.184, which when we plug this in, this gives us 774,000 joules. That's a lot of energy from one Snickers bar. No wonder they tell you to eat it if you're hungry. All right, that's it for today's videos. I'll see you guys next time.